So the next step in this painting is layer 2, Blurry Landscape. This next layer, we're going to follow the fat over lean process like we talked about before. Now remember, the fat over lean process is where in oil paintings, you're trying to add more oil to each layer so that the oil painting remains flexible and you won't get any cracking, meaning your painting will be archival and withstand the effects of time. We're also using this because this style of painting has a particular look to it, and you're going to learn how to mimic that in acrylic paints if you are in the acrylic painting class. The other goal of using this fat over lean process is it helps you learn how to manipulate the paints in a different way. So it's going to enable you to learn how to have greater control over your paint and its opacity and transparency. And I remember when we're talking about our oil painting mediums, a medium is referring to what the paint is made out of. So paint is typically made of two parts: the pigment, that's the little particles of color that are in the paint, and the medium, the thing that the pigment is suspended in. Now, typically in paint straight out of the tube, you have oil paint that has a linseed oil it's suspended in, or acrylic paint, which has a polymer it's suspended in. Now, when you're able to manipulate those mediums more, you can do a lot of really interesting things with the paint. So we're going to be adding additional things to the paint to alter those mediums so that we can change the glossiness, the transparency, its ability to dry. All those kinds of things are what we're going to learn to do with the mediums in this painting. So if you're in the oil painting class, we are going to learn how to use a classic oil painting medium on this layer of the painting. And it's a 3-part medium that is made out of 1/3 linseed oil, 1/3 Damar varnish, 1/3 Gamsol. And we're going to put those all together in our small squeeze bottle. So if you bought the kit, you should have a small squeeze bottle that's included. If you didn't, all you need to get is a small like travel size shampoo bottle. If you have an old shampoo bottle at home, that also works. We don't need a ton of it, so you can just use a smaller size bottle. That way you don't have to mix up as much of your mediums. So remember, the linseed oil we've already used. Looks like something similar to that container. That is what your oil paint is traditionally suspended in. The Damar varnish is something that we're going to be using new on this painting. The Damar varnish, it's made from essentially tree resin. The use of Damar varnish dates back to the Renaissance. It was used because it gives a very sort of clear, almost vibrant glow. It was said to make the oil paintings feel very lifelike. It has a very sort of glossy, particular look to it that has that kind of old oil painting style look. A lot of times today, people don't use Damar as much. There's a lot of different varnishes that are out there that you could also add to the 3-part medium. If you bought the kit from the bookstore, the Damar varnish should be in there. It should look exactly like this bottle, which is the Winsor Newton bottle. If you didn't buy it, you can leave the Damar out of the classic medium mixture. It's not going to be have that same kind of sheen to it. It'll be a little bit flatter. It also speeds up the drying time a little bit. That's a nice part of the addition of the varnish. You could potentially, like I said, there are other types of varnish that are out there that you could use in place of it as well. The third part is just your gamsol. That is your medium that you got from me when you came in at the beginning of the semester. It's that clear liquid that you mix your brushes in. Make sure you're mixing some of your clean gamsol that should be in your clean container with this. So a third of it should be that gamsol. And you're going to mix those three parts together. You can kind of eyeball it. It doesn't have to be exact. A lot of times people will make little marks on the container so they can see them as they pour it. And then shake them up together, and that will be your classic medium you will use. If you're in acrylic, you're also going to be mixing your own medium. And we're going to use two different mediums to mix them together. One is your matte medium. So that one is the polymer that the pigment is suspended in acrylic paint. And the new one we're going to use in this painting is retarder. It's going to slow down the dry time of your paint. Now, we're also going to do a mixture, sort of depending on what kind of retarder that you use. There can be some variations in how much of the medium you need to add. Some types of retarder actually already have matte medium mixed in with them. The kind that's in the kit does not. As you will see, the benefit to not having the matte medium mixed with the retarder yet is that you can create more opaque layers with the retarder alone. If you have questions about this, feel free to take a picture of the retarder that you have and send it to me, and I'll let you know if you have to mix different parts together. Now typically, just with normal retarder, you should have half retarder, half matte medium. Now the reason for this is when retarder by itself, it can kind of separate some of the pigments in it, and it gets kind of like gummy, or sort of gets kind of congealed looking. If you look at the back of the container, oftentimes it says you can only have 1 part retarder to 10 parts paint. When you're working in transparent layers, it's really easy to go beyond those numbers. So when you mix this medium up, you're going to get the benefit of it drying slower along with the transparency. So the second layer, you can see here's the image that we'll be working from. The photograph that we're working from is now a little bit more in focus. So you're going to see some changes. There's going to be greater color variation, and you're also going to see darker darks and lighter lights, so you're going to see a lot bigger range there. Try to focus on the differences, but still don't paint things that you don't see. Don't make up any information, only paint what you see, so kind of loose, washy brush strokes still. Things may look a little bit different than you originally thought, so now you have the opportunity to decide what to change and also to decide what to keep. You don't have to paint completely over everything like you did in the first layer. You're just going to paint where you think the changes need to happen. So where you want to change or cover up, you're going to use opaque paint. And where you want to slightly alter things, you're going to use transparent paint. Now for oil painting, on this second layer, we're going to use the classic medium. For the opaque parts, the parts that you want to completely change something, you're just going to use the oil paint itself with little or no medium. If you need to add fluidity, or where you need the paint to kind of go more smoothly on the canvas, you can add just a couple drops of the classic medium. Where you want to have more transparency, that's where you're going to add the classic medium. The more transparent you want it, the more classic medium you're going to add. For a very transparent area, you can even start with a little pool of the classic medium and add oil paint to it, so you can kind of control the level of translucency. For acrylic paint, we're going to use our slow dry medium on this second layer. Now for opaque paint, you are going to use just a few drops of just the retarder alone, so the retarder straight out of the bottle. The paint will then remain opaque, but it's going to dry more slowly and allow for easier blending. It's also going to give you more mix time when you're mixing your palette. For the transparent paint, you're going to add the 2-part slow dry medium. Because remember, you don't want to make it too transparent with just the retarder because it's going to get all congealed. The 2-part medium is going to give you the transparency, but it's also going to give you that slower dry time. For a very transparent area, you can do the same thing where you start with your pool of your 2-part slow dry medium, and you can then add your acrylic paint to it to make a very translucent layer. Okay, so when you get started, you're going to start with a nice clean palette. Remember, for these demos this time, I'm going to be using acrylic paint. This painting is a little harder to do with acrylic just because you're going to be doing a lot of kind of loose blending. So I wanted to make sure I showed you how to use the acrylic paint specifically for these demos. But like I said, there's very similarities in the way we're going to be adding the mediums. Okay, so for the opaque paint, remember, let's see, I'm going to play my video as we go. You're going to mix your paints, and then you're just going to add just a few drops of the retarder only. I'm going to add my retarder to this just momentarily. If you have oil paint, you're just going to add a few drops of the classic medium that you mixed up. So I got my color mixed. I want to make. Then I'm going to take my retarder, just add a few drops, and then take my palette knife and just continue to mix it all back in together till I get a nice even paint consistency. And then, once I have that mix, it's actually going to give me more blend time. It's also going to stay wet on my palette longer as well. Now for the transparent paint, this is where I've got my medium mixed up. I'm going to add some of my slow dry medium. The more I add, the more transparent that it's going to get. So just to give you an idea, here's our sped up version. Now in the background there were some corrections I had to make, so I had kind of some medium mixture. As I go through in the clouds, there's some areas I want to keep. There's other areas I just want to slightly alter where I'll use some more transparent layers. You're kind of going through and deciding what you need to slightly alter or what you need to completely change. That's kind of the tricky part of this. Like I said, you'll notice significant differences, but that's part of the point. The process that we're using actually is very helpful for nature scenes, as you'll notice as it starts to come into focus. It's a good way to kind of process really complex images as well when you're looking at kind of complex textures. And it's a trick oftentimes painters will use if you're doing this. They'll tell you to blur your eyes so you can't see all the details to initially paint. I'm essentially have blurred your eyes for you. Now, I talked about this technique a little bit last time, but one of the things you can think about using as you're building transparent layers or trying to blur edges is the dry brush technique. You layer on your translucent paint, and then if you want to blur it out a bit, you take a second completely dry brush to blur or blend two colors together. So remember, it has to be completely dry, and it'll help you with your blending. If you're using acrylic, this is really helpful to just have a dry brush handy as you're going because you don't have as much time to work. But to have it ready when you're trying to mix those two colors together, you can take that second dry brush and sort of blend it out over top. Now if I have an area that I want to correct, remember I can use my opaque paint. So I'm just gonna mix a little bit of retarder with it to completely cover over an area, right? Instead of trying to just alter or change it. In other areas, if you feel like it looks representative, you can leave it as is. Now for transparent areas, I can take that medium and add a little bit of the paint and just come in, like I want to make it a little bit bluer. You notice I have some kind of dark shade that I mixed up. I can come in with that slightly bluer area and layer it over top. That's what I can do with some of my transparent layers. Now as you're going, notice I started with my nice neat piles as I mix. But as you start to paint, your palette should look something more like this, where you go in and you start to make little pools where you start to just slightly alter the color one way here or one way to the other way. And, I worked on these paints for over an hour, and they, even though they're acrylic, they still stayed wet, especially because I was adding that retarder to my paint as I mixed. If you're in oil, you should have no issue mixing your paints. In fact, if you keep them covered, they should last until next week, that you could still open them up and get back into them. So, just to go kind of finish up this layer here. So that's kind of the fun part about this. Remember, don't fuss too much over what you're doing. You shouldn't make things up, but you're going in and you're just trying to see where you can darken or lighten things or add more bits of color. You'll start to see the landscape take a little bit more shape as you go. Like I said, if it doesn't look, you start to notice like, that hill's way too high or way too low. You can make the decision at this point where you can kind of keep it and work with what you got, or you can completely go back in and change it with the opaque paint. That's up to you. You're kind of building on what you're working with here as you go. Like I said, we have 2 more layers of this, so you're going to have third and a fourth layer. We'll have one more blurry layer, and then you'll see the whole thing in complete focus for the kind of final finishing touch layer.